You're surrounded by all manner of nasties wherever you go. Bugs from school, colds from work, and even viruses you generously share with your friends and family. But there's one bug in particular that strikes fear into the hearts of men, and only men. That's right, it's man flu season. But is it really the kryptonite of half the global population? Are males afflicted with a genetic disadvantage that prevents them from defending against the infliction of influenza? Is man flu actually a thing? Or are the lads making a big fuss about the same viral experience that the ladies power on through?
Let's find out. I'm Stu, this is Debunked, and we're here to sort the truths from the myths and the facts from the misconceptions.
Whether you see man flu as a badge of honour that suggests men get flu worse than women, or simply a term used by the female sex to mock the bedridden men of the world, or even if you think it's a specific strain of airborne illness that targets the males of the species, we should first clarify what we mean by flu. In scientific terms, flu refers specifically to influenza viruses. Being viral and not bacterial, antibiotics won't help at all with the flu, so it's down to your immune system to battle through this particular batch of nasties. For influenza, there are three types we should look at. Type A and B flu viruses are the types that cause outbreaks every winter. Type C flu viruses cause mild symptoms. The infamous common cold, by contrast, isn't actually a singular nasty at all, and is in fact an umbrella term that includes multiple categories of unpleasant viral visitors, including rhinoviruses, and no, you don't contract these from everyone's favourite chunky grey herbivore. Para-influenza, a bit like influenza, but generally milder and more common outside of peak flu season. And common coronaviruses. Chances are you've had many a coronavirus in your time, but the common variants are nowhere near as dangerous as COVID-19. So, which one of these microscopic flu and cold rotters is responsible for man flu? According to the medical scientists who have investigated this troubling quandary, any virus that causes acute rhinosinusitis, or short-lived inflammation of the mucus-producing tissue that lines the nasal cavity, is a potential candidate for man flu. Diagnosis of acute rhinosinusitis involves the presence of the following symptoms: nasal obstruction, anterior and or posterior secretion, olfactory disturbance, and facial pain. In other words, a blocked nose, a snotty nose, out of your nostrils or down your throat. Your sense of smell is affected, and, well, pain in your face. You'll sometimes get a bit of fever and headache thrown into the mix as well, as a nice little bonus.
And clearly, these illnesses are not sex-specific. Anyone can catch these viruses and all experience the constellation of delightful symptoms we've just described. But do male bodies react differently? And if so, why?
Every time a new study on this subject is published, sensationalist reporting like this hits the headlines, but they simply don't tell the true story. With hyped up news like these filling your news streams, it can be tough to differentiate between fact and fiction. If only there was a service that boiled down the day's news into a trustworthy, informative and entertaining 5-minute read. Of course! There already is! Morning Brew provides you with a free newsletter that sets you up for the day with the latest news from the tech world, the business world, the finance world, and the world. I start my day with both a Morning Brew and the Morning Brew. They go hand in hand, funnily enough. After a quick 5-minute read, I can generally put my news consumption back to bed for the day, safe in the knowledge I am up to date with everything from cryptocurrency to Netflix. Over 4 million other people have already subscribed to stay informed and entertained with Morning Brew. It's completely free and only takes 15 seconds to sign up. You can scan my QR code or click on my link, morningbrewdaily.com/debunked, in the description or comments to try it out. I don't know if I mentioned it, but it's free! Right, let's read between the lines of some of this reporting and get to the real results of these studies. There is evidence to suggest that the male and female immune systems do in fact function differently. Antibody responses to seasonal flu vaccines have been found to consistently be at least twice as strong in women than men. Such differences may, at least in part, be due to differences in hormone levels between the sexes. A 2010 study conducted at the University of Queensland found that
premenopausal women have a stronger adaptive immune response to rhinovirus infection than men and older people,
implying a possible hormonal cause. In 2016, scientists from the Bloomberg School of Public Health isolated nasal cells from male and female participants and exposed them to a type A flu virus, and then to several types of estrogen, sex hormones that are found at much higher concentrations in women's bodies than men's. The team found that by exposing the flu-loaded nasal cells to estrogen, the concentration of virus particles in the women's nasal cells were reduced, and that the virus was being fought off. No such immune response occurred with the flu-loaded male cells. Moreover, several studies have found that testosterone, a sex hormone that is found in much more higher concentrations in men's bodies than women's, can suppress the activity of the immune system. Rewinding back to 2008, a study in mice showed that testosterone can suppress the activity of a type of immune system cell that promotes inflammation. Inflammation tends to feel unpleasant. It's associated with swelling, redness, soreness, and even psychological symptoms such as feelings of depression and an inability to concentrate. But it's a key mechanism via which the immune system functions, increasing the flow of blood to infection sites along with the types of cells that essentially eat microscopic invaders.
So we've established that women's bodies might be better equipped to fight off infection. But to get to the crux of man flu, there are a couple of other important questions to answer. Do men suffer more? Or do they just complain more?
A very recent study published in October 2022 addressed these very questions. They posed the problem as:
To fulfill the popular man flu hypothesis, male participants would have to report significantly higher self-reported disease severity while showing comparable physical symptoms to women. In addition, men could be expected to experience a significantly slower self-reported symptom decline than women.
the team assessed physical symptoms via a clinician-rated assessment tool, which is a fancy way of saying that a doctor had a good look at them and rated some of the symptoms we talked about earlier on a numerical scale according to how severe the doctors thought the test subjects were. For self-reported disease severity, the assessment was pretty similar, except the patients used a questionnaire to decide for themselves how severe the symptoms were. Both tests were completed on day 0 of the trial, then again 5 days later, and again after another 3 days. The findings, depending on your preconceptions, may or may not come as a surprise. In terms of physician-rated symptom severity, men's and women's symptoms were scored as almost identical on day 0. And according to the doctor's observations, women's symptoms improved more quickly than men's. On day 8, women scored an average of 2.6 out of 10 on symptom severity, while men scored an average of 3.5 out of 10. In terms of self-reported symptom severity though, women reported a higher symptom severity on day 0 than men did. By day 8, the ratings for both women and men had significantly improved, but men reported feeling slightly worse than women did. In summary, doctors rated patients for both sexes as equally ill on day 0, and women as less ill than men on day 8, while female patients gave themselves a higher illness severity rating than men on day 0, but a lower illness severity rating than men on day 8. At the start of the experiment, when the symptoms were at their peak, almost no difference in initial illness severity was reported by doctors, and men did not seem more inclined than women to report feeling very ill, contrary to the typical perception of men complaining about experiencing man flu symptoms. In fact, the opposite was true. Women were more likely to report experiencing more severe symptoms.
Might there be a scientific explanation for this difference?
According to the doctors and the women themselves, the women in the study recovered more quickly than the men, suggesting that women may indeed have more effective immune systems. And if this is true, could this perhaps explain why the women reported feeling worse on day 0? If the women's immune systems, on average, mounted a stronger response, it seems possible that they may also have had, on average, higher concentrations of pro-inflammatory molecules circulating in their bodies. As we've already discussed, body-wide inflammation has been found to be associated with feeling, to put it scientifically, rough as a rhinovirus's backside. The women in the study therefore may have been more likely to feel very ill at the start of the study than men, hence the more severe self-reported symptoms. Similarly, the reason men were slightly more likely to report feeling ill on day 8 may well have been because they were less likely to have recovered. There are also complex social factors at play here. It is possible that the ratings of the doctors may have been subject to gender bias. Numerous studies have shown that doctors tend to view women's symptoms as less serious, and it may be the case that conscious and/or unconscious bias were at play. In addition, our society encourages men not to publicly share their feelings, and it might be the case that male participants in this study were less likely to admit to suffering when talking to a doctor in a lab, but by contrast might be more inclined to complain about their symptoms to friends and loved ones in the comfort of their own homes. As well as the differences in immune responses and the social factors at play, could there be some other factor that influences how viruses affect men and women? Some scientists believe that the behavior of the virus itself might differ according to the sex of its host. A research project conducted in 2016 at Royal Holloway University looked for explanations for a pair of puzzling facts. 1. Certain infectious diseases are more likely to result in hospitalization and death in men. 2. These differences are not observed immediately after puberty, but later in life. If sex hormones were the only factor involved, you would expect the difference to be observable as soon as we reach sexual maturity. The team made an interesting observation. There is a difference between men and women in terms of the routes of transmission of viruses. Men are only able to transmit viruses horizontally, meaning to people in their immediate vicinity, while women are able to transmit both horizontally and vertically, meaning from parent to offspring during pregnancy, childbirth, or breastfeeding. This means that from the point of view of a virus whose sole aim is to spread as far as possible, women might represent more valuable hosts than men. It might be the case then that natural selection favors strands of certain viruses that are less likely to kill female hosts, therefore increasing the likelihood that they are passed on to the next generation. All in all then, it looks like there is some truth to the idea that men and women on average have differing experiences of certain infectious diseases, including upper respiratory infections like the common cold and the flu. In general, the evidence suggests that men are more likely to experience symptoms for a longer period of time. Women, on the other hand, might be more likely to experience more severe symptoms in the short term, but recover more quickly. In terms of complaining, there doesn't seem to be much in it. At least, not in the laboratory. On the sofa, under a big blanket, in the bleak midwinter though,
I'm off to take my temperature. Thanks for watching.